When we sit down, it's time for the conversation, and today we have two guests joining us virtually from home to share their 2 cents on the ongoing diplomatic tiff between Kenya and Tanzania. Is regional integration failing at the borders, and if so, at what cost? Our first guest is Karimi. She is a lecturer of international relations and development economics at USIU Africa. She has 13 years experience in lecturing at the university, that is USIU, 4 years in banking. She holds a first degree in international relations and a second in international relations development economics. Christine, thank you for making time.
Thank you.
Our second guest is Professor Macharia Munene. He is also a professor of history and international relations at USIU. He holds a PhD in diplomatic history from Ohio University. He has taught at University of Nairobi, Kenyatta University, Moi University. He's also taught in Spain and the United States of America. He's published books, chapters in books and journal articles, and he's also a columnist. Professor, thank you for making time.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Let's just begin this conversation by getting a sense of what you make of the diplomatic tiff between Kenya and Tanzania. What do you make of President Kenyatta's move to close the border between Kenya and Tanzania and Kenya and Somalia? Christine, let's begin with you.
I think it is applaudable. It's actually something that he needed to do because of the kind of response that Tanzania has given to COVID-19. It poses a threat directly to the Kenyans because we share a border, and our borders, you know, are very porous. We have a union that allows people free movement of goods and people across the borders. So with the threat of COVID-19 spreading across the countries, I think that him stopping the movement cessation was a timely thing. It was a good move in my opinion.
Macharia, looking at the way Tanzania received the news and how we saw some regional officers reacting, was the move well-informed or ill-informed, bearing in mind the East African Protocol on Free Movement?
There is confusion, and maybe there should have been a bit of consultation before the action. So what we have is, as Christian says, President Uhuru did the right thing in Kenya's interest because there are all these things happening and action had to be taken. But when you involve another country, sometimes it helps to make a phone call and say we have this. So what we had was overreaction on the part of Tanzania, especially the region. He had some very interesting words to say about Kenya. That was overreaction. But that overreaction in itself, you can understand it in the context of the perceived national interest of Tanzania, that the Tanzanian officials felt as if they had been slighted and so reacted or overreacted. The good thing is that is under discussion. President Uhuru called President Magufuli and the two of them talk. So they have decided to de-escalate the matter, which is a very positive move on both sides. We have these regular confrontations on both sides, so it is not overly new as far as the relations are concerned.
Said they're not overly new. Christine, it would be interesting to hear. What do you think might have been the genesis of this overdragged diplomatic tiff between Kenya and Tanzania?
I have mentioned before that this is not, it's not new. They've had conflicts on and off. So we hope that this is just one more thing. The origin of it comes from the formation of EAC in 1967, and then the collapse of it, where we had differences in ideologies. We had countries that have newly become independent, moving toward nationalism, focusing on what their people need more. We had the 3 presidents, of course, not agreeing. When I talk about ideology, I mean Tanzania was more socialist and the other 2 countries were towards capitalism. There's a whole political angle to it at that time. But again, you can see that right now, right now we have 6 members of the African community. And out of the 6 members, 4 of them are landlocked, and Kenya and Tanzania are seemingly rivals because now we can only use the port in Tanzania or in Kenya. So it's like 2 brothers who are fighting for space. There has been a long-standing conflict between the people themselves, with even attacks that are almost, we can call it xenophobic towards Kenyans in Tanzania. We've had very many border conflicts where we have the EAC agreements, we have various treaties and all, but they are actually ratified in our laws. But when it comes to actual implementation at the borders and the border, it's actually not happening. So this has been something that has been going on for years. And actually one of the reasons why the EAC broke the last time was because the leaders could not agree. At least this time we have more membership and we have negotiations going on despite the differences in ideology.
Macharia, if this is something that began in the 60s, we are in 2020, why are we seeing the tiff still dragging on 50 years later?
Well, we have to look at the conditioning of the countries and the peoples. We had colonial experiences that were similar but also different. You notice that what used to be called Tanganyika was a German East African colony. So there's still that German element in them. And Kenya had mainly the British settler mentality. And the Germans and the British have not always been the best of friends. And some of that is reflected in their colonies. So when the Great War broke out, they fought because they were fighting in Europe. So we had that sort of thing, the Macharia conflict and all that. We also have, other than the different colonial experiences, we also have the ideology, which Christine mentioned. Clearly, that at independence, we went different ways in the assumption that our way will be the best way to deliver to the citizens. And they believed that their way was the best way to deliver to the citizens. So they created something called Ujamaa, idealistically very good, but in practice did not deliver very much. Kenya was the first to come up with that blueprint. The sessional paper number 10 of 65, which claimed that Kenya was a socialist country, but behaving capitalistically. Tanzania followed and created its blueprint, a social declaration that was more serious in terms of being socialistic than Kenya was, and they did that. Uganda followed very quickly, essentially copying Tanzania, the Common Man's Charter, and there was a time when it looked as if both Tanzania and Uganda were ganging up against Kenya. And as go to the East African community, the first one, that was very well intended, there were also a lot of forces that did not want it. So when it collapsed, in part because leaders could not meet, a lot of it depended on the summit. And some people celebrated the collapse. Fortunately, one may say, there were new leaders in the 1980s, and they realized they had made a mistake. So you had Moi in Kenya, Museveni in Uganda, Nakim Mukapa in Tanzania. And this, give it to credit, they realized they had made a mistake. So they revived the East African community, but did not want to put too much emphasis on the summit. So they created a secretariat that's supposed to be more effective in dealing with this thing. But those suspicions that started from the colonial days, back in the 40s and 30s, there were attempts, a union, they call it closer cooperation. It didn't work, mainly because the others were suspicious of Kenya. Mm-hmm. And that's a there. And so we are these little things. And 50 or 60 years down the line, has not been able to remove those suspicions, in part because Kenya went full-scale capitalistic with some limitations. Tanzania went the other way. And so the ideologies and the personalities are still affecting them.
Okay, Christine, let me hear from you. What is the role of EAC in all this? Because we're seeing two countries that happen to be in the same regional body having a TIF for over 50 years. What's the role of the regional body in trying to resolve this and ending conflict?
Regional bodies are brought together through friendship, through partnerships, through cooperation. So the role of EAC is to bring members together, essentially, to achieve a common goal, which is one, economic, and two, social, and others for after that. So the EAC ideally should be able to bring members together to sit and discuss this. But at the end of the day, there's something, I mean, nationalism is about worrying about myself first, about my country first. So as much as people are struggling with self-interest, which is common with every country, the EAC is supposed to come up with a framework, has come up with a framework to actually manage such that kind of conflict. And ideally, we need to see the 6 leaders just sitting down and discussing this. But in terms of the TIF, sometimes you let bilateral, the two countries try and solve it before you bring in other people. But the role of EAC essentially, it actually has structures and organs that are supposed to deal with this kind of conflict. But the EAC membership is supposed to be supportive to each other and actually help solve this kind of problems.
Integration is failing, bearing in mind that we are not seeing a resolution?
Actually not. I wouldn't say failing. It is very common. It's a common characteristic for every regional organization to have such problems. It's not unique to us. Even the EU has similar or even worse problems. And in most cases, when you see a member that is disgruntled over and over again, the most probable option is to exit, what I would call maybe a Tanzania exit of some sort. But we have not reached that point. The benefits of being in the regional organization are far much more than being on your own, because as a trading bloc, they're stronger, the population is bigger, the market is bigger, and we do not benefit a whole lot more from the South African countries because they are a priority in terms of our trading partners. So I wouldn't say it is failing yet. I wouldn't go there yet. The presidents are talking, and ministers have been directed to speak. So there is some reason going on. Like I said, it's not the first time. So we're just hoping this is just one more thing that we have to cross as a hurdle. But the suspicion and the mistrust and all will never end. I don't think it will ever end, but it doesn't mean that the regional integration cannot happen.
Mentioned benefits, and Professor Macharia, I'd like to hear from you. Maybe if you could paint a visual picture, what does both Kenya and Tanzania stand to lose if this TIF goes on and on and on?
Both sides will lose in terms of trade. Kenya imports a lot of food from Tanzania because they seem to grow it better or more. They also import manufactured items. So we have trade. Tanzania is one of the biggest trading partners with Kenya, and that cannot be forgotten. And Kenya is also a very big trading partner to Tanzania. And so on trading line alone, there's a lot of loss to come from that. In terms of personal relationship, the ultimate objective of the East African community is to have one people, ultimately. But that one people cannot come when we are insulting each other or closing, which we like closing occasionally. So the discussion in the East African community is that let's open up the border. That's why we even created an East African passport, which is hardly used, but it was a good thing. So in terms of interests and objectives, the peoples of East Africa want to be together. There's no doubt about that. But they have more things they have to deal with. And that's why other countries want to join. We have admitted Rwanda and Burundi. We admitted South Sudan. I understand Sudan wants to see whether it can be considered. And when Somalia gets its acts together, maybe. So the idea is good, and most people agree, yes. But then we also have to realize that there are these border and national problems that keep on interfering with the big picture. Even contributions to the finances. Not all countries in the community they adhere. And that itself is a problem, because we can say that, let us do this. But when it comes to implementation, they have a problem because they have not paid up. And you have the East African community depending a lot on foreigners for support, affairs of the community, which itself is an obstacle. So there are a lot of forces interfering with the likelihood of togetherness. Some are external, some are internal. Some are nationalistic, like what Burundi is doing. It's because it has to worry about its little problem first before it can deal with the bigger East African problem. You have Tanzania itself. It also has big internal problem. Zanzibar and the mainland do not always get together. They are always quarreling over something. So when we have these differences, it should be seen in the big picture as part of the normal growth towards the bigger picture.
Christine, I'd like to hear from you. Now that we have COVID-19, it is paramount that we have an integrated approach. Why is it important? Because we are neighbors, and WHO said COVID-19 is not going anywhere, but you're seeing Tanzania take a different approach in comparison to other East African countries. Why is it important to have a unified approach in the fight against COVID-19? And how can we do that?
This is a presidential problem because it is the leaders who need to come together to discuss the best approach to this. Right now, there is a big dispute, not just in East Africa, but all over the world, as to what direction is best in dealing with this. So we have that Madagascar curative, the hub here. Yeah. A lot of countries have jumped into it. And others are saying the numbers are not making sense. If you look at even the scientists are telling us they're not even sure what they're talking about. So there are debates, and it's good that people discuss these things openly. So what we have in East Africa is that we are not agreed as to the best way to approach this. And the disagreement is from a nationalistic position instead of a regional thing. So Tanzania is almost the Madagascar way. And the president, to say that he is not going to wear a mask, he is not going if we want to attack a kazi, those kind of things. So a very different approach to the whole thing. But when we look at the final number,
need a unified approach. Why is it important that we have a unified approach? Christine, very briefly, we are running out of time.
Okay, because our borders are porous. We all know that when you share a border, as much as you want to control it, there are some places where people freely moving from one country to another. I mean, with Tanzania, there needs to be a unified approach because you cannot stop the spread of COVID if you cannot control your borders. So if Tanzania has let loose and decided that they're not going to take any measures against, to prevent the population from COVID, and Kenya has, then it basically means we are as strong as the weakest link, which is Tanzania. And which means that all 6 countries are now susceptible to now increased cases of COVID. We're even seeing drivers testing, very many of them testing positive that are supposed to be coming into Tanzania and vice versa. And you have the Kenya government returning their drivers, and which is now going to be, the risk is that the numbers are going to increase because of the movement in and out of Tanzania. Again, we don't have correct numbers. The numbers of deaths are not rising from 21 in Tanzania. They could only mean one thing. They're not testing, they're not reporting, or they know something that we all don't. You cannot tell me that the whole entire world is worried about COVID-19, but Tanzania has taken such a lax approach to it. You'd rather be cautious than not. So when Tanzania is not cautious, it means all 6 countries are still vulnerable, very vulnerable, because we really, at the end of the day, cannot control our borders 100%.
Conclusion, Professor Macharia, where do we go from here in terms of harnessing regional integration, not just for economic development, but also to ensure our people are safe in these times of COVID-19?
I think the governments need to talk to each other more, because ultimately they are the ones who decide. So it's good that President Uhuru and President Magufuli are talking. That's a positive thing. And I'm sure they are also talking to Museveni, and they are talking to Kagame. and they should be talking to Nkurunziza. He's still in office. And Salva Kiir. All these, what do we do together as a region? And the more they talk, the better the way. They'll find a way out. But as Christian says, we need to deal with this coronavirus disease, but it's also a political disease. And that's why we have these problems. We cannot agree on the way forward. And those are political things which need to be sorted out politically. Yeah.
Your parting shot, where do we go from here?
Well, closing our borders is one thing. But I think the other countries need to strongly come out and condemn what Tanzania is doing. If they choose to do what they do, because the country is sovereign, if they choose to do what they're doing right now, then all borders need to be closed with very strict patrols and with very strict measures at the border that nobody leaves Tanzania into the other countries. I think the EAC, just not the 2 presidents only, the 6 presidents need to strongly come together and do this together. But if the other 5, I mean, it's a fight of 5 against 1, then they need to impose some measures, some strict measures that ensure that Tanzania is going to abide by this, if at all diplomacy does not work. Because negotiation is the first thing. If they agree on some measures, no problem. But their president has already given the go-ahead to go business as usual. So asking them to now go take measures we are taking right now may be a little too late. So the best thing that has happened so far is now our government and the others have taken precautions. Then we can only assume that Tanzania knows something we don't, and we just take measures against them as a bloc.
Much. Yeah. Thank you, Christine, and thank you, Professor Macharia, for making time. It's always a pleasure. And I hope that when they are able to resolve, we can come and talk about what lies therein in terms of economic potential. And if not, we can still have a conversation on what it would cost us so that maybe they could listen to us and work the differences out. Thank you so much. When we come back, my mic is off and your voice comes on Social Watch.